Well, we have seen deportations back in the news, and as we like to say, stay on track. They all go back. Jack Posobiec has been, as usual, getting some attention paid to him because some comments he made riled up the usual suspects. And we're going to talk about that today and a little tip that you can take away from his antics. I'm Joshua Lisec. This is Daily Persuasion. I am the New York Times bestselling author and co-author, a ghostwriter of more than 100 nonfiction books, and a certified hypnotist. Through my unique lens of experiences, I teach you how to better influence the VIPs of your life and your career. Okay, so recently Jack, Joshua Steinman, Mike Cernovich, others, let's say among the new right with our, let's say, platforms, Mike and Jack's being significantly the largest, have been talking about what does it actually mean to be an American. And there's this character in Minnesota. I believe he's a candidate for mayor of Minneapolis, Omar Fateh, something like that. And he's pointed out that one of his objectives, of course, is to significantly raise the minimum wage and, let's say, institute other aspects of democratic socialism. And his constituency is primarily Somalis who live in that part of Minnesota, or would be, rather. And when he has been giving his campaign announcements and he's been giving appearances and otherwise campaigning for office, what have we observed him doing? We have observed him use the phrase back home, also our home, and simply home. What is he referring to? He's referring to Somalia, not at all Minnesota. And so the irony, of course, is Omar was born in the United States, and yet this is not his home from his perspective. He is an American citizen due to birthright citizenship, which, as we know, existed in order to allow those individuals to serve office in the very early days of the country who were born in the colonies prior to them becoming states, prior to the founding of the United States. This was a way to allow actual Americans to be grandfathered in, you might say, to be eligible for public office. That's birthright citizenship. That's its intent. And of course, it has been manipulated that any illegal who wanders over the border and gives birth to a child, that child is now a citizen. That's called anchor babying. We've even seen that with popular characters on the right, like Vivek Ramaswamy would be an example of an anchor baby. And I think he's even shared that's very much so the case. Now, that said, when we hear someone like this Omar character describe home, well, it very clearly indicates he is not an American in any way, shape, or form. And when we observe his ideas, these are not American ideas. These are ideas from the global South. This sort of purge the coffers of cash money and distribute it to those who want, who say, gimme. That is not the American way. What did President John F. Kennedy say? That Omar, to paraphrase, would perhaps say instead, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what your country can do for you. In fact, it's not even your country, because that's Somalia. Ask not what you can do for white taxpayers. Ask what white taxpayers can do for you. The racist subtext of innumerable immigrants is no longer avoidable. This seething resentment that individuals from the global South carry with them. I am reminded of an Iranian individual who recently published a tweet that went viral. And he was saying how without the free medical care that he received in the United States upon immigration with his parents as a child, that he would not have survived. And that without American taxpayers footing the bill, he would have passed away as a child. Of course, we look up his Twitter history and we find him saying things like America ought to unalive itself. And that, in fact, by the way, is his handle on X, formerly called Twitter. His handle on social media. Wow. That's rough. That's rough. And he further condemns the United States and American culture and white people, so on and so forth. This is not good. This is not good. When Jack was recently giving speeches and giving interviews about the problem of Americans who aren't Americans, like this Omar character, we have seen, and he has published, this is the persuasion tip, by the way, he's published inquiries from journalists asking him to comment on his controversial remarks. And to one of them, he simply replied one sentence, and he screenshot. I like to say he screenshot because that's more fun. Well, so we'll say he screenshot the journalist's email with his reply. And his reply was very simply, everyone knows what an American is. Everyone knows what an American is. And I like this because the left-wing construction of reality is based on complexifying the simple. I was reading this book called Father Figure. It was something like How to Be a Feminist Dad or something. And I chuckled to myself, picked it up, and began flipping through it. And I noticed that the author's last name was Shapiro. And I noticed that he, in the bio, mentioned that his partner is a woman named something Steinberg. And I believe they said they live in New York, if I remember correctly. So this is getting a sort of New York or Manhattan elite culture perspective on reality. And there was a portion of a chapter, a significant portion of a chapter, and this is the only excerpt that I read, so it might have been even more. It was the author, this Shapiro character, attempting to explain in sophisticated vocabulary how men and women aren't real. And he was citing study after study after study after study. It was as if he was sort of building to this, actually XX and XY chromosomes aren't real. And here's what the science says, don't be a bigot, you transphobe, something like that. It was rather bizarre. And I couldn't help but, let's say, juxtapose Jack's response to this journalist, because it was the same day that I began reading this book that I saw Jack's post with a screenshot email. And as I'm reading this Shapiro character, what he has to say, how to be a feminist dad or something like that. First of all, the LGBTQ is not compatible with feminism, as we have observed. In any case, I'm thinking to myself, everyone knows what a woman is. And it takes this significant amount of laborious confirmation bias and cherry picking of various scientific studies to build to this, actually, it's all culture and socializing. And that's blank slate theory, effectively, which is all people are impressionable if they're simply socialized or enculturated in a certain way. Okay, sure thing. The persuasion tip is, of course, a way of not answering the question, but humiliating the asker of the question in public to such an extent that they're not sure what to say next. And everyone, at least the vast majority of people who are listening, watching, or otherwise observing, know the answer. And the answer is simplified to such an extent that the person who was asked the question initially would make a fool of themselves by continuing to ask for more information and clarify. That's why I like it. Understand that mass persuasion does often involve sort of the reality of debate. In any kind of public debate, what you see happening is each participant trying to overtly or covertly embarrass the other party. Is their job to persuade the other party? No. It's to persuade the listener. And so when you are challenging or being challenged by competitors or troublemakers or radical left-wing journalists, what is your job? Your job is to allow them to be butthurt over your response, so that their negative emotional reaction and their massive amount of text, their wall of text, okay, contrasted with your simple assertion of truth, with that truth being so obvious you don't even need to say what it is. And they would then go, well, not everyone. What do you mean? What do you mean? Oh, you mean white? You mean white Americans? And they'll start twitching, or they'll write an even longer wall of text than the first. It has long been said that the person who, in a conversation, says or writes the fewest words wins, at least in the court of public opinion. That's important to understand as well. And speaking of the court of public opinion, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the fact that if you look at who speaks the fewest words on the Supreme Court, it's Clarence Thomas.